Are you tired of facing the Sicilian defense every game? In this video, I'll show you how to punish it with the aggressive Wing Gambit, a sharp and tricky weapon that catches many players off guard. Get ready to take control of the board right from move 1. The usual main lines after knight to f3 lead to very complicated positions filled with theory. That's why instead, I'd like to show you an offbeat variation, pawn to b4, known as the Wing Gambit. At first, I was skeptical, thinking that with correct play, black could easily get a solid position. But after trying it in blitz games against strong players and even masters, I realized it's not that simple for black. This line creates real practical problems. The idea of pawn to b4 is to deflect black's central pawn. If black accepts the gambit, which happens most of the time, we continue with pawn to d4, gaining strong central control. Before going deeper into variations, let's look at some general ideas behind this position. So, you should understand your plan. Even if you forget the exact moves, you'll still know how to play. What do you gain for the pawn you sacrificed? First, you get a strong central pawn that can advance any time to attack and push black's knights back. Another big advantage is your fast development. Your pieces come out easily because your lines and diagonals are open, while black's development is slower. For example, black's bishop can't move freely unless the pawn in front of it moves first. Thanks to your quicker development, you can start attacking earlier. These ideas, strong center, faster development, and early attack, are white's main strengths in this position. Alright, let's consider what black usually does in this position. In most cases, black tries to challenge white's control of the center by playing pawn to d5. This is a natural response because if black does nothing, white's central pawns become very strong, controlling key squares and giving white a space advantage. By playing pawn to d5, black attempts to undermine white's central structure. After the exchange of pawns, white can respond with pawn to c4, attacking black's queen and gaining an extra tempo. This move also helps white rebuild a strong pawn center while keeping black's queen slightly awkwardly placed. If black simply retreats the queen to a safe square, white maintains a comfortable space advantage and has active pawns ready to advance. Most often, black will capture en passant in response to white's pawn push. White then recaptures with the knight, simultaneously developing a piece and maintaining the initiative. At this stage, the placement of black's queen becomes critical. If the queen moves to certain squares, white can consider moves like bishop to d2, threatening a discovered attack and putting more pressure on black's position. To avoid these tactical problems, black usually retreats the queen to d8, which is a safer square. However, even in this scenario, white's development is faster, and white can continue to advance pieces, control the center, and prepare for an early attack. Overall, this line shows how a small pawn sacrifice can lead to long-term advantages in space, development, and attacking potential for white. The first key move here is bishop to b5. Since you are a pawn down, you need to play actively to gain compensation, and attacking is the best way to do that. So after bishop to b5, black usually responds with bishop to d7, then you continue with rook to b1. One of the advantages of sacrificing the pawn earlier is that you now have open files on the queenside for your rook. The rook often goes to b1 or c1, and in this position, along the b file, it already targets the pawn on b7, which puts pressure on black's position. If black ever captures on b4, your rook immediately becomes active, attacking along the open files. A very pleasant setup for white. That's why black usually avoids capturing there, and instead continues development with pawn to e6, opening lines for the bishop. White then develops naturally, bringing out the knights, bishops, and queen, and after completing development, white can often strike in the center with pawn to d5, a common and powerful breakthrough that helps launch an attack. In this position, white usually begins by pushing central pawns to open lines for an attack. This is a critical idea because opening the center allows white's pieces, knights, bishops, rooks, and queen, to become active and create threats against black's position. After exchanges in the center, white can recapture on d5, gaining a strong central presence. At this stage, black must be cautious, as white's pieces are already well positioned, and a move like rook to a1 can quickly put black in serious trouble. Black often tries to seek safety by castling, but white can regain the sacrificed pawn with queen takes b7, which simultaneously attacks black's rook in the corner. The only reasonable defensive response for black is bishop takes b5, counterattacking white's rook. White can then simply recapture with the rook, keeping up the pressure and maintaining threats along the open files. In most cases, black responds with knight to d7, which turns out to be a tactical mistake. White can then play rook to d1, pinning the knight to the queen. The knight cannot move without losing the queen, giving white a decisive advantage. This sequence highlights the power of quick development, open lines, and tactical awareness. By centralizing your pieces and carefully coordinating attacks, you can turn a small pawn sacrifice into a strong and often winning initiative. To be completely clear, in the previous position, instead of playing knight to d7, the move that actually keeps black in the game is queen to d7. This move counterattacks the rook and maintains a solid defensive setup. White still has a slight advantage, but it is not a winning position immediately. Even so, for a player like Magnus Carlsen, having a small advantage in an endgame is extremely valuable. Carlsen often converts even the tiniest edge into a victory against the strongest opponents. In this position, white can continue with moves like bishop to e3, gradually improving the position. In the endgame, white might even win the pawn and push for promotion, for example along the a file. This illustrates how the main line of the Wing Gambit typically develops. Even if black survives the initial attack, it remains difficult for them to equalize. White often regains material and keeps a strong position, maintaining significant winning chances. The Wing Gambit thus serves as a powerful and practical weapon, creating opportunities for active play and long-term advantage. There is also a very sharp and tricky trap in this line, which many players might overlook. After black captures, white can respond with pawn to d4, immediately challenging the center and opening lines for an attack. One of black's natural moves is to develop the knight to c6, which seems logical, but actually allows white to start attacking the knight right away. By pushing pawn to d5, the knight is forced to e5, and then white can bring the bishop to b2, targeting the knight again and keeping up the initiative. If black continues with pawn to d6, white has several strong options. Playing pawn to f4 pushes the knight away and strengthens white's control of the center, while knight to f3 is another excellent move, simultaneously developing a piece and creating a subtle trap by renewing threats against the knight. If black decides to capture on f3, it does not harm white. The queen can come out to a strong square, maintaining superior activity and central control. A more ambitious move for black is bishop to g4, pinning the knight and applying pressure, which looks aggressive at first glance. Even in this case, white has tactical resources and can continue to develop actively, keeping the initiative and often gaining a long-term advantage. This sequence demonstrates the power of the Wing Gambit. Even small missteps by black can lead to serious positional or tactical problems, while white can consistently build activity, pressure, and attacking chances. However, this line contains a very powerful tactical combination that can catch even strong, master-level opponents. Knight takes a 5. This sacrifice opens up black's position and can lead to devastating consequences. After this, white temporarily sacrifices the queen. For example, if black captures the queen with bishop takes queen, it is only a temporary sacrifice. White can then play bishop to b5 check, forcing black into a position where the king has no choice but to give up the queen. Once this combination begins, white starts capturing black's pieces one by one. White can take on key squares, including f7 with check, forcing the king to take on d7. Then white captures the on d1, and on the following move, white can capture the rook, completely dismantling black's position. Through this series of precise moves, white effectively destroys black's army and ends up with a decisive, winning position.